Mevorchem HaChodesh v'Erev Rosh Chodesh Nisan Tavshin Lamed Daled, which is again the same kviyas like this year. So he begins, HaChodesh HaZelochem Rosh Chodashim, this month, going on the month of Nisan, which Hashem was telling Moshe Rabbeinu when he was taking the Yidden out of Mitzrayim, is the head of months. Rishon Hu Lochem L'Chodshei Ashana, it is the first of the months of the year. For you. It is for you the first of the months of the year. It's known the analysis of this and the examination of the language. From the general idea, it's understood that there's two levels. One thing is the level of the head of months, and and then there is the months of the year. Since the month of Nisan is the first of the months of the year, it's understood that the head of the month of Nisan is even higher than other Rosh Chodashim. So in addition to the fact that there's Rosh Chodashim, there's also the idea of Chodesh Nisan and Rosh Chodesh Nisan. From this is also understood that Shabbos, when the Rebbe said this Maimer, was Erev Rosh Chodesh. So from that is understood also concerning Erev Rosh Chodesh that precedes it, that precedes Rosh Chodesh. After the Shabbos Erev Rosh Chodesh, like it says in the Haftarah of the Shabbos that we read every single time when it's Erev Rosh Chodesh, which begins with which is known by the words Machar Chodesh, that tomorrow is the Rosh Chodesh, that Yonasan told David. He says, "V'nifkadato, you will be remembered, ki pocket meshavecha, because your seat at the table where you ordinarily sit, which at Shol HaMelech's meal, will be empty." So Chassidus explains, "They have avoided the pocket meshavecha through the avoida of your seat being empty. Nasa acharkach v'nifkadata becomes afterwards that you were remembered." In other words, the lack of something, the negation of something, causes the thing to come about. Just like the matter is in its simple sense. On Erev Rosh Chodesh, the moon becomes completely hidden in a total state of bittul. That's the idea of your seat will be empty, just like the moon disappears at the last day of the month. There's nothing left over there. Through that results on Rosh Chodesh that it's the birth of the new moon. That's the idea of you will be remembered, that says by David HaMelech. So again, from a negative, we're coming to a positive. From the empty seat, we're coming to the remembrance. From the lack of the moon comes to the birth of the moon. So he says in line 15, in a similar way in the avoid of a person, through the avoid that your seat will be remembered. Nasa inyan the vinifkadata comes about that your seat is empty. It becomes the idea that you will be remembered. Inyan as a Karen. What does that mean? That's the remembrance. The Kivon Rosh Chodesh Nisan. Since the head of the month of Nisan is the highest of all the heads of the months, so too the special bittul that precedes the zikaron that of Erev Rosh Chodesh Nisan. Because the whole inspiration from above is dependent on inspiration down here below. If so, for a higher level of inspiration from above, you need to have a higher level of So therefore, where an ordinary month needs an ordinary Erev Rosh Chodesh, when it comes to the date before the month of Nisan, Since the Chodesh Nisan is so much higher, so the Serusa Asata, the preparation of the bittul prior to that, must be so much greater in comparison to or corresponding to the greater revelation of Rosh Chodesh Nisan. That your seat will be empty. And the Rosh Chodesh Nisan, that affects the idea that you will be remembered on Rosh Chodesh Nisan. Has to be much higher. Has to be so much greater in the avodah that your seat will be empty of Rosh Chodesh of the other months. Top of page Vav. So, Yuvim Bahagdim, this will be understood. What it says in a different pasuk, it says that when it comes to the blowing of the trumpets and so on, in Parshas Pinchas, it says the head of months, you have all the different things. Maybe quite sad Mashab Nishmasein Bal Helu the Beis Nisan. The Rebbe Rashab, whose yahrzeit is on the second day of Nisan, in other words, quite in close proximity to the Shabbos. And in a much greater length in the Mamorim the Tzemach Tzedek. Shehiksha B'Zoyar, the Zoyar asks on that pasuk that says Roshei Chodshechem plural, as if there are multiple heads of a month. Shehiksha B'Zoyar, that the Zoyar asked, there is no, how many heads are there to the moon? Chodesh could also mean the Levana, because it is, the Chodesh is the lunar calendar. So the word Chodesh could mean Levana. Roshei means multiple heads to the Chodesh, to the Levana. So the Zohar says the Levana doesn't have multiple heads. It only has one head. The moon has only the head. What's the head for the moon? That's the sun. The ihu reisha lagaba, that the sun is a head for the moon. What's this idea? Because we know that according to Kabbalah, this idea of the birth of the new moon on Rosh Chodesh is called Yichud Sira v'Shimsha. Rosh Chodesh inyana Yichud Shimsha v'Sira. Rosh Chodesh is about the union and the mating of the sun and the moon, the Mashpia and the Makabel. Shalavona Makabel Mashemesh, that the moon is receiving from the sun, as opposed to at the moment before the Moilad Alavana, the moment before Rosh Chodesh, where the moon was dark. That was because it didn't receive the light of the sun. So Rosh Chodesh is about that union of the sun and the moon. So the moon, what is the moon's head? The sun. So there's only one head, not multiple heads. V'imkein, therefore the Zohar asks, if so, Mao Inyan Rosh Rabim, why does it say Roshei Chodshechem, the heads of your month? This is indicating that every month has multiple heads in the plural. And the Zohar goes on to explain, and Mavayer, he explains, there are two heads in every single month. Meaning there are two types of unions and matings between the sun and the moon. V'inun Yaakov v'Yosef. This is the idea of Yaakov and Yosef. It helps to understand this more in the spheres that he brings down in the commentary on the side. Yichud, Shimsha, and Sira usually refers to, in Kabbalah, to the union of the moon is Malchus. Malchus only is like the moon that has only the light that receives from higher. The sun is usually the spheres above Malchus. It's referring to the Midos. Specifically, but what it receives from is from Yaakov Avinu. Yaakov is the level of Midas Hatiferes, which is the body, the center of all the Midas. And then there's the level right before Malchus. Yosef corresponds to Sfiras HaYisoid, and Yisoid is the direct mashpia into Malchus. So Yaakov and Yosef, Tiferes and Yesod, are the two heads that every month has. Malchus receives from two heads. The moon, which is Malchus, receives from two sons, if you will, from the level of Yaakov, Tiferes Tiferes, and from the level of Yosef, which is the level of Yesod. In Valderach Mashakosov, similar to what it says, Eila Toldos Yaakov Yosef, that Yaakov, the history of Yaakov, the Chazal say, and the history of Yosef were very similar. They went through similar types of issues and problems, having to being away from home and being fought by the brothers. It's many different things, many different problems that we're saying Yaakov and Yosef are similar. Same thing spiritually, the levels of Tiferes and Yesod have to do with each other. Yaakov and Yosef is Guf Ubris. As we know, we have this in Pasach Aliyah, we say this Erev Shabbos, that the body, the Chesed is the right arm, Gvur is the left arm, and the body, the trunk of the body, Guf, that's Yaakov, that's Tiferes. Bris, the place of the Bris Milos, Yesod, Siyum the Guf, that's the level of Yesod, that's the level of Yosef HaTzadik. So, Yaakov and Yosef is the trunk and the bris. Shechad Choshvinon, even though we said these are two heads for the months for Malchus, but still in all, because they are all in the same line, Tiferes and Yesod are in the same line, and Yaakov and Yosef are considered that Yosef is a hemshach, a continuation of Yaakov, more than all the other Shvatim. So there's a special union, a special connection between Yaakov and Yosef, and so too spiritually, Tiferes and Yesod, which is in the central line, not like the right or the left. So they have a special connection. So they're considered like one. So in truth is, every month has one head. But that one head, if you will, has like two aspects to it. Yaakov, Tiferes, and Yosef, which is Yesod. Now the Rebbe is going to explore both sides of this equation. Are they two? Are they one? It says in line 14, to note, since even a question in Torah is also valid, is also a matter, it's not wrong. The fact that he asks in the Zohar, how many heads are there to the moon? So it is truly that really, if the Zohar asks how many heads, that means that really Rosh Chodesh is one head. There's no multiple heads. Ella gufa in the Rosh Chodesh yeshnei inyanim. There are two components. Roshei Chadashim. There is the heads in the plural in this one head. You can move them in Yaakov and Yosef shinyanim echad, like it's understood from Yaakov and Yosef that they are one concept, but still in all. Mikol makom zeh Yaakov zeh Yosef chulu. This one is Yaakov and this one is Yosef. Valpia Amar Leil, moving according to what we said earlier, it's understood. Sheshnei and Yonim the Yaakov and Yosef. Kfishem Beresh Chodesh Nisan, the two components of Yaakov and Yosef, the way they are on the head of the month of Nisan. La'achri ha'gedamas in the epoch Meshavecha Kfishem Beresh Chodesh Nisan, after prefacing that your seat will be empty. In other words, the bittul, that's on the day before Rosh Chodesh Nisan. They're much higher than the way they are in the other months. In other words, the Rebbe brought in something that the Zohar said concerning all the months, that all the months have a head, and all the months have Yaakov and Yosef being part of that head, and yet, since the month of Nisan is so much higher than all the other months, so therefore, the Yaakov and Yosef heads of the month of Nisan is on a much higher level than the Yaakov and Yosef, the way they are in the other months. Ois Gimel, line 25. Be the Indian, and to explain this matter, the explanation of the matter that the Rebbe is about to say is based on certain principles that are explained in the Mamorim that we mentioned previously from the Tzemach Tzedek and the Rabbeim following him, and also in a Maimer called Bocher Chodesh from Alter Rebbe. Hine Isa Medrash, top of page Zayin. It's brought on the Medrash Mishabocher HaKadosh Baruch Hu B'Olamai, when Hashem chose His world at the beginning of creation, Kava by Rosh Chadashim V'Shon, He established and set in it heads of months and heads of years. When Hashem chose Yaakov and his children, in other words, when He took him out of Mitzrayim, He established in it a head of month of redemption. In other words, that Nisan now becomes the head of the months instead of the way it was before, that was all in Tishrei. So the Rebbe is going to make a distinction between these two establishments of Hashem. Kava by Rosh Chadashim, that Eibishter established the levels of Rosh Chadashim that was at the beginning of creation when He chose His world. Who klolos ha'inyan shalavan mekabels ma'Hashem. It's the general idea that the moon receives from the sun. Hachel memoilad halavana, beginning. That at the birth of the new moon, that's the beginning, that's the start of the moon receiving from the sun. Shu inyan yichud shim shavasira, that's the union and the mating of the sun and the moon. Until it works its way up, that there is the moon being full, the ultimate state of the union of the sun and the moon. Already, the idea of Rish Chodesh, the union of the sun and the moon, that's already a high thing. How do we know? Maybe not. He says, it's understood from the fact that Hashem established it this way when He chose His world. So in other words, that the fact that He chose His world expressed itself in this idea of the sun and the moon coming together on Rish Chodesh. So it's a very important thing. But still in all, this perfection of the union of the sun and the moon that's to be found in Rosh Chodashim, the way it was at the beginning of creation and on, this is a perfection that has to do with the regular chain order of the descent of the worlds. This is also included the wondrous thing, the world of Atzilus is also in this regard considered one of the worlds. It's called Olam HaAtzilus. Behind this means, though it's a world of unity, it's joined with Hashem. That's like we say, as it says concerning the world of Atzilus, that Hashem is one with the life force of Atzilus, and Hashem is one with the bodies of Atzilus. Mikol Malkum, still in all, the world of Atzilus is called worlds. Shenikraim b'shem Olam. Lashain Helam, from the expression of Helam, concealment. That's why it's possible to say about the worlds of Atzilus, that the spheres over there are in the number 10 and not 9, number 10 and not 11, because when you have the concealment of the world, so things are limited, and they are exactly this way and not that way. There's no infinite states. So that is all when Seder Shtalshlus, that's Bachar by Lami, when Hashem chose the worlds, including the world of Atzilus. But higher than this, who in the Mishbachar Yaakov Banov, higher than this is the way He chose Yaakov and his children. Shenis Galu, a Matan Torah, was revealed by the giving of the Torah. Shals Kava by Rish Chodesh Al Gula, then He established in it a head of month of redemption. The difference between the establishing it heads of months to establishing a head of month of redemption, it's like the difference of prior to Matan Torah and after Matan Torah. Because essentially, Yetzias Mitzrayim was for the sake of Matan Torah, so this establishment of the month of Geula goes hand in hand with the change that took place through Matan Torah. Shalifnei Matan Torah is Agzeira Tachtoim Le'al L'mayla V'Elyon Le'edul Mata. Before the giving of the Torah, there was a decree that those below should not rise above, and those above should not descend below. Ubeshas Matan Torah Hayabit Lagzeira, during the giving of the Torah, this decree was nullified. V'Elyonim Yordul Mata V'Tachtoim L'mayla. The above descended below, and the below ascended above. In such a way that Hashem said, I will begin, like it says by Yed Hashem al Har Sinai. This idea that Hashem descended on Har Sinai is an inspiration from above. It's a revelation from above. That's from such a high place. It is beyond anything that an inspiration below could even reach over there, top of page Ches. It's higher than the level of inspiration of above that comes about through the inspiration down here below. So he points out, what was it like before Matan Torah? This is also what the Chazal said, that all the mitzvahs that the Avis performed were only like a scent. It's a smell. It's not substance. Though the Avis were completely bottled to Hashem, like we're learning now in Tanya, that they are a chariot, a divine chariot to Hashem. They have no mitzias for themselves; they're completely bottled. As far as they were concerned, they weren't missing anything in their avodah. They weren't lacking anything. They were perfect in their avodah. Mikol still in all. Since there was the decree that those below cannot ascend above, after the wondrous greatness of the level of the ascent above that the Avis could attain, it's still limited to the chain order of descent. The Avis could only reach to the root of the created levels. Only after Hashem chose Yaakov and his children, the giving of the Torah, the decree was nullified between the separation of above and below. So then Hashem established a head of month of redemption. Here is a point that the Rebbe very much emphasizes. The whole idea of redemption transcends the world, is beyond the world. This is where it says Matan Torah, that Hashem introduces himself like to the Eden. I am Hashem your God that took you out of the land of Mitzrayim. It doesn't say, I am Hashem your God that created heavens and earth, even though Chassidus a lot of times emphasizes seemingly the creation of heavens and earth. Yesh Ma'ayin is the biggest miracle and the biggest chiddush possible and shows the greatest power of Hashem. So why did Hashem choose to introduce himself with such a type of title? Why did he give his bona fides and introduce himself? I am the one that took you out of Mitzrayim. Instead, of course, had a greater miracle, a greater power. I created everything, something from nothing. Creation, yesh ma'ayin, that's only b'cheik haboyre, etc., etc. Only Hashem's very essence can create something from nothing. The reason why that is so is because the creation, yesh ma'ayin, is the level of Seder Ishtalshlus. That signifies the godly light that has to do with Seder Ishtalshlus, and that is why at the beginning of creation, when Hashem chose the world, it was only the establishment of Rosh Chadashim, the way they have to do with Seder Ishtalshlus with the world. But I took you out of the land of Mitzrayim. That is Geula. Geula is beyond the world, and that's why it became a much greater revelation, a revelation that's higher than the world's. Now that we understand that, he's going to bring it back in Ois Dalet concerning what it has to do with the levels of Rosh Chodashim, Rosh Chodesh of Nisan, and the two levels of Rosh Chodashim, etc.